Good afternoon. Welcome to Ronald A. Willis, Celebration of Life. I think that title is really appropriate, don't you? Not a celebration of a life, but a celebration of life. You know, whenever I think of Ron, I think of that big smile and that happy face and that iridescent spirit. And I think how happy he would be if he knew all of you were here, and I think he does, to celebrate this day with him. Marie and family, thank you so much for sharing all of these last few days, all of the stories and messages, and to family and friends, all of us gathered here together. And I'd like to say especially, you all have your programs, I'd like to just introduce speakers. I'm called the MC, but that doesn't seem right somehow. I was MC at his 1999 roast, and for those of you that did not attend, it was unbelievable. Unbelievable. I'll tell you more about that later. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Jeff Willis, who is Ron's firstborn son. And Jeffrey has been a friend for a long time. He'll have some words, and then Emma and Claire Willis will speak to us. And then Lynn Levy, who is the godson of Ron, and actually, I understand, worked here in the theater for a couple of years. So we're happy Lynn is here with us. So first, let me introduce Jeff Willis.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the entire Willis family, I want to thank all of you for coming for this celebration of my father's life. As I look out at all of you and see your faces, I can clearly feel the love and respect that you have for him. In this time of loss, immediately following his passing, all of us closest to him find great comfort in recognizing that. So I thank you again for being here today. As the eldest of Ron's three sons, I had a particular relationship with my father. Like many of you, he and I shared an intellectual life that included a robust exchange of ideas. He and I shared a passion for epistemological questions, as well as metaphysics. Above all, however, it was epistemology. My father was certainly my teacher. He was also my intellectual soulmate. But more than that, as I grew older and his need to provide paternal guidance receded, he became my close friend. And so, like those of you here today, I will truly miss my friend. Later, we will hear from some of my father's students and longtime colleagues. So as I talked with my mother and my brothers about what I would say here today, I thought I would focus on some of the things you may not have known about my dad. Some of the experiences we had together as I grew up. Of course, as you would expect, my brothers and I grew up exposed to and surrounded by the theater. I spent many a night attending my father's rehearsals for this or that play that he happened to be directing at the time. And yes, as a young teenager, many times I had to be dragged, coerced, or otherwise made to go to the theater on those nights. Later, of course, I realized how much I benefited from the experience. In fact, if one were to go back and look at the various productions my father directed, my brothers and I can be found playing this or that child role over the years, sometimes being called upon to push the envelope of what some might find acceptable, as my father frequently did. I still clearly remember my hanging scene when I was 10 years old in my dad's production of John Brown's Body. Before moving to Lawrence in 1970, we spent 5 years in Fort Collins, Colorado, where my father was part of the faculty at Colorado State University. For my brother Craig and me, those were truly the wonder years, much like the depiction in the TV show of the same name. Craig and I would spend long hours playing outside in the neighborhood with our friends. When it was time to come home, either for dinner or later at night, my dad would simply step outside the house and whistle that shrill whistle he was capable of making. Many of you here have heard a similar whistle that he used to get people's attention, much like, but I can't do it. He would use without the fingers, he would actually have a very shrill whistle that would make that same sound to grab people's attention. Well, the come home whistle was based on that simple whistle, but sounded more like this. And that was the whistle that we heard. It always worked. Sometimes on a clear summer night, we can even hear it blocks away from the house. We would yell back, "Coming!" at the top of our lungs and make our way home. Our time in Colorado was full of outdoor activities. My dad had a trail motorcycle that he used to go back and forth to work. I learned to ride on that motorcycle. He would take us to go on off-road rides on the motocross track in the foothills right outside of Fort Collins. One of my most memorable events was when I was just learning and I lost control of the motorcycle at the top of a steep hill. And I didn't let go of the right-hand grip on the handlebars. You know, the one where the throttle is. Well, he jumped in, caught the rogue machine just in time, and prevented anything serious from happening. He took it all in stride and had me get back on and go again. We also frequently went camping up in numerous locations throughout the Colorado Rockies. Most of the time, we were out for a week or two. My mother would make up a bunch of her crunchy granola in advance and prepare our meals on the Coleman stove that we carried with us. During the day, my brother and I would fish in the rivers, streams, and lakes we camped next to, and my parents would do whatever it was that they did at the time. We had our favorite spots that we went to over the years. Invariably, it would seem that there would always be setting up that heavy canvas tent at night in pitch black dark, long after the sun had set. Mom would hold the flashlight, and Craig and I would help Dad set up the tent. He would always direct us, hold that corner down, or don't let that pole sag. And Craig and I would do our best to comply, even though it wasn't always easy. Speaking of easy, as I prepared for today and reminisced with Craig about the times we spent camping in Colorado, he recalled a time late at night after we had all settled into our sleeping bags, and after some silence, my father said to us both, "Remember, boys, there always will be two roads in life, the easy road and the harder road. Make sure you take the harder road." Neither of us is quite sure that we have been able to live up to that advice in our own lives, but upon reflection now, it certainly serves to give us further insight into his. During several of the summers living in Colorado, we took long road trips around the U.S. We got to see many different parts of Colorado itself, such as Dinosaur National Monument, Mesa Verde, Four Corners, Royal Gorge, and others. We also traveled along the Gulf Coast, where I first learned about Spanish moss and just how good fried crawfish could taste. We visited Woodstock, New York, just weeks after the famed concert held nearby, as well as New York City and Niagara Falls. On one of those trips, I'm not sure which one, my father literally saved our lives. We were on some two-lane blacktop highway, and I was sitting next to him in the passenger seat in the car. The traffic was quite dense, and everybody seemed to be in a hurry, speeding down the road and darting in and out. Suddenly, out of nowhere, just feet in front of us, an oncoming car went to pass the car in front of it. With just seconds to spare, and in the blink of an eye, my father quickly swerved onto the right shoulder, avoiding the head-on collision that surely would have happened had the shoulder not have opened up and his reactions not been so quick. We also benefited from his quick reactions the time I almost burned the house down. You see, when I was about 10 years old, I had this chemistry set given to me for Christmas. I would do this or that experiment in my bedroom where it was set up and make inroads into greater understandings of the various properties of different substances. I particularly like the properties of things like iron filings, magnesium ribbon, and other things that burned. On this occasion, I had been spending considerable time heating up various concoctions in test tubes with my Bunsen burner. For some reason, I had dumped about a quart of isopropyl alcohol into a 1-pound metal coffee can. Well, as I was doing something, I had inadvertently caught the can of alcohol on fire. I didn't have anything nearby that I could use to cover the can and smother the fire, so I thought I'd simply carry it to the nearby bathroom and put it out there. Needless to say, I only got several steps from my desk when the heat on the sides of the can got so intense that it caused me to lose my grip and drop the can, thereby spilling pretty blue flames all over the bedroom floor. Well, I immediately ran out into the nearby living room and screamed to my father what I had done. He jumped up, ran into the bedroom, grabbed my bedspread, and quickly smothered all of the flames. Oddly, all of this happened so fast that only the alcohol had had a chance to burn. In fact, I think there was only a little darkening of the baseboard trim near the door. My father didn't yell at me or berate me for doing such a stupid thing. Instead, he recognized that the event itself had been sufficient for me to learn my lesson. Good teachers have that sense, and I benefited from it enormously. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. Thank you all for coming to remember our grandfather. Claire and I, along with our cousins Elizabeth, Brand, Sean, and Jessica, call him Yaya, because that's what we've always called him. It was always a bit confusing to explain to friends growing up that Yaya was actually Chinese for paternal grandfather, because no, we're not Chinese, and yes, we were born in Hong Kong, but he was definitely not Chinese, and yes, our parents speak Mandarin, but he was the Yaya. Well, I guess there are probably many Yayas in the world, mostly in China and assuredly a few here in the States, but for us, Yaya was his name, and a title unique to our experience with him. Thank God, too, because once our friends were familiar with what Yaya meant, it made the stories we told at recess require much less explanation. As Ron Willis's grandchildren, we have also spent a large portion of our lives in tandem to the University Theater and his theater family here. As the eldest grandchild, I have 27 years of memories to sort through and share with you. Some of you knew him for a longer period than I did. Some of you maybe just met him. Some of my first memories in Murphy Hall were tagging along to Yaya's classes and into years well past his retirement when his students would become my peers. Something kept happening when people learned that Ron Willis was my grandfather. They'd lean a little closer to me, peer through eyes, and smile slightly like they were about to discover a secret and ask, "What is it like to have Ron Willis as a grandfather?" The answer is almost just what you might think. We heard stories. His own stories about growing up in New Jersey, stories about meeting our Nainai. Nainai is Chinese for maternal grandmother, or paternal grandmother, but of course to us it means an entirely special and unique thing full of its own set of stories and magic. They told the best stories about our dad and his brothers, and I'll never forget how much sense the world made when we learned that our father's first words, words, were "look at the butterfly." We heard stories about all of you, stories that illustrated the value of discovery, talent, hard work, and creativity. He spoke of his theater students and colleagues with the same familial tone he used to tell long-standing family stories. The love, critical respect, and tireless dedication he showed for his students is one of the many reasons I became a teacher. Although I spent most of my time on the other side of Murphy Hall, Yaya was the model for life as an artist and a teacher simultaneously. He taught people through the art of theater, and I can't say one other person has impacted the way that I teach more, although his only direct piece of advice to me for teaching music is, "Could you please teach them some stage presence?" I still do. It probably would come as to no shock to you that one of the first things on my shopping list for my first year of teaching was a big bag of Jolly Ranchers. During the spring semester of that first year, one of my high school seniors came in during a plan period. He grabbed a Jolly Rancher out of my giant jar sitting on my desk to sit down and talk to things about happening in his life. That's when I knew I'd made it as a teacher.
I'm trying to think of my first memory of my Yaya, but I can't. He's just always been there. You can probably imagine he wasn't much of a background kind of grandpa. He was always there, loudly letting us know. He's the reason I feel so deeply drawn to well-crafted put-downs. Whether that's something that eventually puts me in therapy is yet to be determined. Through watching him, I found a boldness in myself to be heard and to go for the big laugh. His passion for theater is clear, but he seemed to me a lover of all the arts, except musicals. Sorry about that. He and Nai always encouraged my passion for visual arts. I remember once Yaya took me into his office just to show me all of the pictures he'd found online of optical illusion drawings. He was so impressed with the idea of hiding one picture inside of another, and it inspired me to strive for that depth in my own work.
He played with us. Most grandparents do, but probably not in the same ways as Yaya. On some holidays, he would put word puzzles on each one of our place settings and encouraged us to solve before the end of the meal. He told the best jokes we got in a lot of trouble for repeating at school. He read and recited poems to us, new and classics, over and over, like Casey at the Bat, The Cremation of Sam McGee, or The Children's Hour. He was the best at playing tricks on us, like rubbing the coin into his arm or eating our noses. He followed through on tricks other grandparents might have been too tame to carry out, like dumping a whole glass of water on my face as I napped on the couch, an event for which he made sure to secure the audience of my sister first.
One of my favorite memories. He played so many tricks on us and doled out just enough zingers to keep us humble, but he had such a special sense of pride when we sent it right back to him. One Christmas, as children, Emma and I wrote a little ditty for him, and so I'm going to sing it. And just keep in mind, we were kids when we wrote it, so it's jolly old bald yaya man with his big white beard thinks he is a Santa Claus, but we're here to make that clear. Santa brings us presents, Yaya calls us names. Though they look quite similar, they are not the same.
Definitely one of his proudest moments when we could dish it right back. We were lucky to spend a lot of time with Nana and Yaya when we were growing up. Once we played a game where whichever one of the grandchildren could wait the longest to take a broken piece of chocolate bar got the largest piece given to them at the end. Clever mind tricks that I will take with me for all future interactions with children. Another time, Claire found a stash of wigs, and Dress Up quickly turned into, let's make a short film about old ladies at a card game, where we played yet another contest of who could look at the camera last.
I lost.
Not Claire. We attended plays like Way of the World, which taught us words like frippery, and Hair, which taught us words like, as the grandchildren, we've been asked to be civil at this, but you know which words we learned in Hair. I took one of my early boyfriends to see Futz at the Lawrence Art Center, and I remember at intermission he had a lot of questions. We spent hours outside and found some trees with faces and others with rings. We were as brave with our adventure as we were when Nene put burning pink mercurochrome on our scrapes. He never let us take anything too seriously, especially ourselves. And he pissed us off, and he was a pain in the ass, and he made us closer and love even more. So what was it like to have Ron Willis as a grandfather? It was the best, and we were lucky.
Yeah, that's the proverbial tough act to follow, I suppose. But I had a chance to walk into downtown, and I was reminded of some of my, some memories came back about when I was here in Lawrence back in 74 to 76, and I lived with Ron and Marie for a period of time, and so just some of the things, the dragon on the door, just to embellish on some of the interesting ways in which Ron and Marie looked at life and encouraged, a kind of artistic metaphor approach to life. I jogged with Ron at a time, and I saw a picture of him at the house. Beautiful form, by the way, as far as I can tell. and learned how to build decks with Ron and these sorts of things. So part of his multi-talented aspect. And all that's just, I have a couple thoughts here that I wrote down, and which I think of more as an homage to Ron Willis, because I had the privilege of knowing him for 58 years, almost my entire life, as it were, which is why I needed that walk to bring back some memories. But in that, I benefited from a lasting friendship that developed among my parents and Ron and Marie back in Defiance, Ohio, which was, I think it was Ron's first college teaching job. So it will come as no surprise that some of my earliest memories, childhood memories, are of the four of them laughing, conversing, and forming a bond that lives on not only in the hearts and minds of our two families, of Willises and Levies, but also in the confidence, intensity, and joy of being here now, and of the practice of the theater and the pursuit of learning as a metaphor about how to live a meaningful life, and to lend a helping hand, which certainly was the case for me, and to make things better if you can. Although that first generation Willis-Levy friendship didn't invent those ideas or that way of being, from where I sat, they fostered it as a way of life, a way of life worth living and perfecting. Until a week ago, Ron, or a little more than a week ago, Ron and Marie continued to chart that course together. In Ron's eulogy for my father, Larry Levy, Ron made mention of benefiting from his early career relationship with Larry. And again, from where I sat and the way I see it now, Ron went on to walk that walk for others throughout his life, and certainly for me. In my case, that led to Lawrence, Kansas, and Ron and Marie's hearth and home. Ron already was on his way to becoming the director of theater when I finally started college here at KU. Looking back, it occurs that I was only just starting college at an age when Ron already had taught college. That Ron's great intelligence and many talents led him into education leaves little doubt in my mind that there are those who teach and do things at the highest level. What was clear then, when I started college here, is that if there ever was someone who needed Ron's guidance, I was that someone. And in that, and for me, this is in his several timely and developed, I mean, I benefited, I should say, from his various roles as an educator, a mentor, a friend, a director and leader. No one I know made clear explanations about how something could be, especially how it could be improved and refined or left as it was, and that was Ron. That he became known as a great adjudicator of college theater really was just one of the many compelling examples of Ron's greatness. His wit and wisdom, intelligence and insight, direction and leadership, exuberance and excellence led us places, led me certainly places I hadn't been before. So now, 40 years later, though I start on a phase of my life without Ron's physical presence, a phase which is itself someplace I've never been before, the influence of his ideas and his clarity of thought, seeing him as an example of how one can be, strikes me as something of a quality worth, something of value, and a darn good thing for me to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, as Jack said, my name is Craig Arthur Willis. I'm the second son of Ron and Marie Willis. Thank you all for coming to this celebration of his life. I am sure that if you knew my father, you were aware of him as the intelligent, quick-witted, articulate force of nature that he indeed was. I am just glad to have been one of the lucky ones that got to experience the other side of his personality, the soft, sensitive, gentle family man. One of the ways in which he expressed this other persona was to sing and strum an old classical guitar that he had to us, his children. His repertoire was not huge, but the few songs that he sang to my brothers and me left a lasting impression on us. He would sing songs like The Sloop John B., The Streets of Laredo, and the one which I'm going to attempt to play for you today, my favorite, The Fox Went Out on a Chilly Night. So now I'm going to try and channel my inner Ron Willis and give you just a glimpse of the man I feel fortunate to call my father. Well, the fox went out on a chilly night, prayed for the moon to give him light. Many a mile to go that night before he reached the town. Oh, town, oh, town, oh. Many a mile go that night before he reached the town. Oh. Well, he ran till he came to the farmer's pen, where the ducks and the geese were penned in. Any couple of you are gonna grease my chin before I leave this town. Oh, town, oh, town, oh. A couple of you are gonna grease my chin before I leave this town. Oh. First thing he did was grab the gray goose by the neck, a duck across his back. Couple of you gonna whack, 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 or the legs all dangling down. Oh, down, oh, down, oh. Mind the quack, 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 or the legs all dangling down. Oh. Old Mother Giggle Gaggle jumped out of bed, ran to the window where she cocked her head, crying, John, John, the gray goose is gone and the fox is on the town. Oh, town, oh, town, oh. John, John, the gray goose is gone and the fox is on the town. Well, Johnny ran to the top of the hill where he blew his horn both loud and shrill. Fox, he said, I better go with my kill, 'cause it'll soon be my tail, oh, tail, oh, tail, oh. The fox, he said, I better go with my kill, soon be on my tail, oh. Well, the fox went home to his moist-warm den where the little ones, 8, 9, 10, said, Daddy, Daddy, better go back again. Must be a mighty fine town, oh, town, oh, town, oh. Daddy, Daddy, better go back again. Must be a mighty fine town, oh. Well, the fox and his wife, without any strife, cut up the goose with a fork and a knife, and you never saw such a supper in their life. Little ones chewed on the bones, oh, bones, oh, bones, oh. Never saw such a supper in their life. Little one chewed on the bones, oh. Thank you.
Jerry Crawford is a longtime friend of Marie and Ron's. He couldn't be here today because of professional commitments, but he sent a letter that he asked me to read. So with your indulgence, I will do that. You have to understand this was a special relationship, and I think you'll get a good idea of it as I go on here. It's called The Fark and the Phantom. A Loving Memory of Ronald A. Willis by Jerry L. Crawford. We and our wives, Marie and Patricia, became bonded, lifelong buddies. Our families became one, despite the separation of miles and years, and we lost Pat after a long illness in 2011. How we got our nicknames: Ron, the Fark, spelled Pharque, and I, the Phantom, spelled Fantom. That was the genius or joke created by Ron, of course. Here are the highlights of the lives and careers of the Fark and the Phantom. At their first meeting in the Willis Quonset home in Ohio, Phantom was in his U.S. Army Reserve uniform, prompting wicked but witty satire from the Fark, that's Ron, upsetting Phantom, that's Jerry, to the point of yelling at him, "I never want to see you again. Get it?" And he left. He grabbed Pat and walked out. Later, Pat and Marie got them together for good. The Fark single-handedly saved the Phantom when Phantom tried to throw his doctorate away in his third year at Iowa. A year later, when Phantom returned for a month from Nevada, Fark spent several nights guiding Phantom through revisions of his second and final play written for Phantom's degree. Then Fark coached Phantom for his final Ph.D. orals. Moral of the story? No Fark, no Ph.D. for Phantom. A couple of years later, Fark successfully directed a play at the University of Vermont written by Phantom. The very play Iowa had rejected, causing Phantom to attempt scuttling that degree. Yes, Fark made the play work well, in Vermont, of course. Sometime later, Fark, Marie, and Jason spent a summer in Las Vegas, where Fark taught classes and directed a fine production of Hot L Baltimore at UNLV. Over many a year, Fark mentioned Phantom and many others on the best way to adjudicate plays for the American College Theater Festival. He also was a renowned teacher and mentor of hundreds of students at many colleges and universities in the United States, especially at the University of Vermont, Colorado State, and KU. Fark was a leader in many national organizations, including ACTF, Partners of the American Theater, and the College of Fellows of the American Theater, Kennedy Center, Washington, D.C. Fark was a skilled playwright and author of a revered book on play adjudication. His dramaturgical skill with playwrights nationwide was legendary. Phantom's most recent play, which was done in reading in 2014 here in Lawrence at Theater Lawrence, and then later was done in a workshop in Baton Rouge. Fark's early guidance of Phantom's first novel, recently completed, was significant. Fark even acted in a play by Phantom done at the conference in Philadelphia. And during a speech Phantom gave in New York on how to survive a heart attack and still work in the theater, Fark fainted at the end of the Phantom speech, causing everyone to be scared as hell. Well, it was just a minor sugar issue, but Fark blamed Phantom for that speech, of course, and not long after that, Fark said that that terrible fall on this stage, in the University Theater that Ron took, called Phantom later, and he blamed him. The only flaw in the Fark was his bogus effort to proclaim his disdain for Phantoms and Jack Wright's love of sports, especially baseball. Oh, man. Namely, Jack's Royals and Phantom's Indians. Jack and Phantom finally figured out that Fark was really a closet fan. What will now sustain Phantom, above all, are memories of daily Skype chats over the past year and between the Fark and the Phantom, and in addition to their creative work, they relished memories of keeping abreast of their children, expanded families, Marie's doings, films, world events, and one another. There was endless needling and wit, of course. As Robert Ingersoll said of his late brother in the 19th century, I say now that were every person for whom Ron Willis did some loving service to bring one blossom to the resting place, he would sleep tonight beneath a wilderness of flowers. There was, there is, no gentler man. Sleep in lasting peace, dear Fark, my brother, Ron. I love you. The Phantom, Jerry. Another letter came in from Ronald A, Ph.D., 1981. Ron Willis changed my life. He changed me. I know I'm not alone in this. His impact as a teacher was so powerful and long-lasting that when I had the chance to give the presidential address for the American Society for Theatre Research conference, I had to begin with a story about Ron. Quote, "It's the mid-1970s. I'm in graduate school at the University of Kansas. Ron Willis, a brilliant, wise man, is teaching his class, The History of the Theatrical Event. The required texts include Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance and The Crack in the Cosmic Egg." Now, you have to remember that the mid-70s were just at the tail end of the 60s. We began with the Greeks, and Ron asked the question, how much was entry into the theater? Of course, I'm prepared. I know the answer. I jump in, 2 obols. Then he says, how much was a loaf of bread? My head explodes. This was a moment when I got something, I had to say something, but my head was too disarranged. Not just the economies of theater Ron was talking about, but about its ecology as well. I know my realization is no-brainer rather than a mind-blower, but for me, given the year and my background, it was germinal. How much is a loaf of bread was in fact the title of my speech. I think many of us had moments like this in Ron's classes. He constantly asked the best, most productively provocative questions. He constantly made us think in useful ways. It was always about making us more clear-eyed and tougher-minded about whatever we were studying. It was never about him. It was always about the work of getting our minds and hearts to engage in it as fully as possible. Ron totally got that separating scholarship from practice, whether as a director or actor, was a dumb thing to do. It's my word, not his, but I hope he might agree. His commitment to praxis not only grounded our research, it also in many cases made us more employable. Then young scholars who'd abandon the studio and rehearsal hall were the exception. Ron himself was a fine, fine director. It was a privilege for those of us who got to be directed by him. He didn't just integrate theory with practice, but also helped us see that practice without theory is anemic. He also was just plain fun. Wise, smart, sly, exuberant, generous, present. He put his fingers into our brains and moved everything around in the most interesting ways. He changed our lives and our futures. Can't imagine what my path would have been without him. I shall miss having lunch with Ron whenever I come back to Lawrence, but Marie, I'd love to keep having lunch with you. Ronald Blair.
Blair because I knew her well, and that is Ronald Blair. The last time, actually the only time I ever stood on this stage, its pre-renovated version, I assume, was when I was asked, actually demanded, to replace somebody in a production of Hamlet that Jack Brooking had directed in the spring, but it was being redone in the summer, and that somebody wasn't willing to reprise the role of Rosencrantz. So I did, and for the record, I was never an actor. I was a bad actor, I was a director, I'm still a director and still a bad actor. And everybody from Dr. Brooking on down just kept saying, oh, good job, Michael, good job. Only Ron Willis told me the truth, which he put very succinctly. He just said, Michael, Mandy Patinkin was a hell of a lot better. Now, even then, before Mandy became Mandy exactly, I knew that he was right, of course, and it was no shame not to be as good as Mandy, but still. Okay, on to the prepared text. Surely none of us expected to be here. Like me, I suspect you never imagined a world without Ron Willis somehow in it. I realize now that Ron always felt larger than life to me, in so many ways. Larger than life, a cliche, God knows, but cliches are cliches for a reason. That sounds like something Ron must have told me, or not. When one loses someone like Ron, no doubt we ascribe all sorts of stray wisdom to that person. And hey, we should in this case. He deserves it. The Ron Willis I remember was analytical and so damned incisive. He was verbally dexterous, if that's really a word. Actually, he was ambidextrous. He was always provocative, a true provocateur, challenging, and in the best of ways, subversive. Oh yeah, and he was always funny. So much humor of every kind and of every color. I actually arrived in Lawrence, Kansas in August 1970, which means I arrived when Ron arrived. I was a Jewish kid fresh out of the Eastern establishment whose mother was certain that I'd be somewhat of an alien in the land of Dorothy and of the temperance movement. My mother actually drank quite a bit. But there was Ron, not a Jewish guy maybe, but New Jersey born and a Rutgers alum. We never discussed this until later, after I'd already been on the faculty at Rutgers, when he tried to persuade me to accept an otherwise excellent job offer in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I had to tell him that the amazing sky out here and that rich black earth didn't speak to me, to this New York boy, quite the way it apparently spoke to him. But it did speak to him. And of course, Ron understood that I didn't take the job. But I also respected that Ron had built for himself an extraordinary life and rewarding career on this campus. And to this day, honestly, for all sorts of reasons I don't have time to go into, I wonder if my life and career could have been different had I listened to him and settled into the chair position at UNL so that I could have been just like Ron. So I was in Lawrence just for 3 years of courses, then exams, before grabbing my dissertation fellowship greedily and heading off to Europe. I don't think I took more than 2 courses with Ron in that time, and he wasn't my primary advisor. Yet I remember him as flat out, as Rhonda said, the best pure teacher I've ever been privileged to know. I will never forget how in that first couple of weeks, he had the cheek or the gall, I don't know what's the right word, to agree with me that maybe I shouldn't take the one directing course that was available to graduate students. Something supposedly I needed to take, but he said, no, don't bother. I hear it's not all that good. Apparently it wasn't. I'd heard the same thing. But I could, he said, direct projects, and he'd be there as needed for endless conversation, director to director. Okay, I doubt he said endless, but he might have, and those conversations did happen, and they are utterly key to how I grew up to be a director. So honestly, Ron was flat out the best teacher I've been privileged to know. I want to believe I told him that as we both grew older, though in truth, we weren't in touch that often. And I'm thankful and privileged to get a chance to say it here today, this afternoon. Ron's teaching lived outside as much as inside the formal classroom. From 1970 to 1973, I remember his office was down in the green room. Oh, by the way, there were no Jolly Ranchers then, I'm almost certain. But the green room, I figured, was where they stick the new guy, in the basement. Dr. Finley, Dr. Kolke, they got to be upstairs, but Ron was in the basement. Eventually, I and my colleagues kind of sensed that the green room was Ron's proper habitat, among the students, as it were, his people. I wasn't surprised when years later he mentioned to me that no longer the chairperson or the director of theater, he was back in the green room. And last Friday, when I, like no doubt all of you, was grappling with loss, it was amazing to watch Ron's Facebook page fill up with post after post after post from ex-students. Only a very few from my day. Some of us are gone. Most from the 80s and the 90s, and so many, the youngest ones, I suspect, remembering his presence outside the classroom. And one spoke eloquently of his presence in the green room. So little time in front of you now, but here's another memory. Sometime in the late 90s, Ron called me up in Boston, where I was, to say he was heading there to do some research on some American playwright I'd forgotten, and could he stay with me? Apparently, KU's research grants were pretty chintzy. Or to be honest, because he never told me about the grant, just maybe Ron wanted some company for his week. For a week, on warm May evenings, we spent hours outside in my urban backyard, quite un-Kansas-like, grilling steak and chicken and drinking way too much gin straight out of the freezer with lemon juice. And perhaps because I had just become a father at the age of 47, we talked about family as much as academic politics or theater. Then I got a different and quite wonderful sense of Ron Willis. My daughter, Emma, had just been born, and he told me he had an Emma too. I just saw her for the first time in my life this afternoon. That Emma was a wonderful granddaughter, and he assured me that with a name like Emma, everything would be just fine. And in every conversation or email since, they weren't all that frequent, but still, we never failed to get the other up to date on our Emmas. Never did I dream that one day I would share this stage with Ron's Emma. It's truly, as I said, an honor and a privilege to meet her, to share in remembering her grandfather and my teacher and friend, Ron Willis.
I tell you, there are so many ways that we can define Ron. Mentor, master teacher, confidant, director, role model, friend, father, yay, light, and hope. Well, each of these characteristics could take up an entire speech, so I really stewed over what to talk about. It was so difficult to come up with something, and finally I just felt Ron's presence, which I feel so blessed this past week to have felt several times, and he said, "Look, this is not about you. Get over it." Jesus, just pick one thing, right? One thing. So, here is one thing, just one. And that is, I tell you, Ron Willis was a feminist. And how could he not be? He wouldn't be married to Marie if he wasn't. The most gorgeous, incredible, graceful woman that, I'll tell you, Marie, you have been a role model. You and Ron have been role models for Jim and I for a very long time, and I love you so much. And just watching you this week, you are so graceful, and I'm just so honored to be in your life. But Ron Willis was a feminist. I met Ron when I was 21 years old, the age of college students, the age of the dozens and dozens of young women he has mentored and taught over the years. Until I met him, the truth is I lived in fear. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know my values or my value. Ron was the first person in my life to tell me that I was smart. From the moment we met, he believed in me. And so, like so many young women before and after me, Ron adopted me. Ron started by giving me a word every day. He'd bring me a word, and he'd say, do you know what this means? And I'd say, well, sometimes, yes. Well, then what is it? Describe it to me. If I didn't, go look it up, and then we'll talk about it. Within a short period of time, he encouraged me to go back to college and pursue my bachelor's and then my master's degree. He taught me about theater. Everything I know about theater came from Ron Willis. He taught me about the fragile magic. Ron pushed and prodded and nudged to the point where sometimes he just really pissed me off. I mean, he just, you all know, he was so intense, so incredible. He dug deep inside of me until I emerged. And for better or worse, here I am today because of Ron Willis. And he never stopped telling me that he was proud of me. Ron recognized that women, at least my generation, and I actually think even young ones today, we're conditioned, at least a lot of us, are conditioned to react to life circumstances as opposed to taking a proactive role, and that drove him nuts. He would not tolerate weakness. He would not tolerate indecisiveness. He had a unique way of recognizing our abilities and what we needed to do to strengthen our mind and our spirit. He was a champion of women. Ron taught me to check my motivation. He taught me that I had choices. He taught me to question everything and first and foremost to respect myself and my integrity. Some of you are familiar with the quote entitled Our Deepest Fear by Marianne Williamson. Every time I read it, I think of Ron, because it feels as if he were saying the words to me and to every woman he has mentored. Here are a few excerpts from it. Your deepest fear is not that you are inadequate. Your deepest fear is that you are powerful beyond measure. It is your light, not your darkness, that most frightens you. Ron taught me that. You ask yourself, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. Ron taught me that. As you are liberated from your own fear, your presence automatically liberates others. Ron taught me that. So to honor Ron, I want to live powerfully. For those of us who have been blessed by having had a relationship with such an incredible man, let's be fearless. Ron taught us that. Thank you.
You'll have to excuse me, I'm a tech student. All of us were always on book. Eat your shorts, Willis. Those are the first words I ever said to the man, down in the green room before a show. I was 20-something, a tech student, and he was the head of my department. We liked each other instantly. And for the next 40 years, that's the way he introduced me to people. And this is Jeannie Wilkerson. And the first thing she ever said to me was, eat your shorts, Willis. Well, you can imagine what an icebreaker that was to subsequent conversations. I cherished him. He was, for me, at varying times, a teacher, a friend, a father, but always a mentor, always a touchstone, and always present in the moment. He was the funniest person in the room. Any room. Those of you that have never heard the story of Ron's first day of student teaching, find those of us in the crowd later on that know that one and have them share it with you. It's hilarious, especially considering that he made teaching his life's work. While I was at KU, I was co-technical director with Jim Peterson for the Inge Theater. We would alternate TDing shows, and it was my turn. I got a show in which the director and the designer weren't speaking to each other. They wouldn't even share the same space. It made for interesting rehearsals. I was given the colors for this large oval, raked oval in the Inge, and I set about painting it. The next day, it took me all day, because it was painting and then texturing it. Following that day, the designer came in and said, no, those are not my colors. These are my colors. Following day, I did her colors. The next day, the director came in and blew up and said, I make all the choices for this show. These are my colors. That's what I want. So I did it. Long, ugly story short, I ended up painting that damn floor this many times. This many. On the 5th day, the director came in, and I'll never forget this mental image as long as I lived. You know those windows that are at the end of the hall of the Inge? It was daylight, and he walked in with a briefcase, and he's backlit with all of this sunlight, throws the briefcase down on the floor, and then begins to scream at me, and vicariously to the designer, of course, that is not there, and tells me, again, that my colors are wrong and that he wants his colors. At that point, I turn on my heels and I walk down the hall to Ron's office, close the door, sit down in the chair, and begin to cry, one of those cries, you all know it, where you can't breathe. Ron, I've painted this damn thing 4 times. He comes in, she comes in. I'm running out of paint, Ron. And he says to me, Jeannie, I can't figure out why you painted it that second time. But I'll tell you what you're going to do now, and that is nothing. You will do nothing. And you will continue to do nothing unless and until both of those two people come to you physically together in the Inge and tell you what color that damn stage floor is going to be. It is not your job to please anybody and everybody. It is your job to implement the united decision about that stage that they have come up with from that creative team. And nothing is what you're going to do until that has happened. Screamingly obvious solution, you say? Not when you're young and green. It is a method of conflict resolution, bringing warring parties together for the betterment of a show that has served me well my entire professional career. And I can tell you that there is a handful of 300-pound, suspender-wearing, cigar-chomping, card-carrying IA stagehands that have benefited greatly from this little method of resolution that Ron taught me. When you're my height, weight, and sex, you got to have a lot of tricks. And over the years, Ron gave me a tool bag of tricks. Many years ago, I brought him a personal problem overwhelmingly full of scary thoughts and feelings, and I knew that no one had ever experienced this before. He comforted me by saying I was not unique in having such thoughts and feelings, and that he too had had similar experiences. When I asked how he got through it, he replied, I hugged Marie a little tighter. And I know that I can roll over in bed and hold on to Marie, his beloved Marie, his touchstone. I want you all to take a look at your palms. Get them out of your lap, look at your palms. Look closely and you'll see an M etched on both of them. The Greeks believed that this meant memento mori. Remember, you are mortal. We're not here that long, babies. And while we're here, leave a legacy. He did. Be different. Be creative. Be funny. Be present. Be caring. Be weird. Be lovable. And be loved. He was. It's been said that when you lose someone close to you, you lose an entire library, their skills, their stories, events, experiences, and teachings. Regarding Ron, we must all be like the readers in Vonnegut's Fahrenheit 451. We must remember and share those stories, those skills, events, experiences, and teaching. We all carry them here. I can tell you that the loss of Ron Willis, for me, is tantamount to the Romans burning the Alexandrian library. I love you, Marie Willis. And Ron, you know what you can do with those shorts. Memento mori.
I didn't know how many people were here sitting in the front row. Okay. Hello, my name is James Still. I was here as an undergraduate, graduating in 1982. And during my years at KU, Ron was the chair of the theater department, which meant he wasn't teaching, kind of. He wasn't in the classroom. I knew I was missing out on something, so my senior year, I asked Ron if I could do an independent study with him. Here's how I thought it would go. Once a week, for all of my senior year, I would be an audience to Dr. Ron Willis, sitting at the great man's feet and hoping that some of his brilliance might rub off on my 21-year-old self. So once a week, I sat at Ron's feet, and I tried to take notes. My plan was to write down everything that seemed important, anything I needed to know more about. And then I realized I was trying to write down every single thing he said. One day he said something like this, you know, babe, if you're going to learn anything that matters during our time together, it's going to be from something you say to me, because I don't know shit about shit. So I stopped trying to write down everything he said. I stopped taking notes, and something started to happen. After a couple of weeks, my independent study turned into a weekly 3-hour festival, the Mardi Gras of independent studies. Freewheeling, free associating, passionate arguing, questions and jokes and reading assignments and writing assignments. We were the laboratory. Language was more like modern dance. And every idea was a kind of punch-drunk tour through ontological philosophy and biomechanics and para-aestheticism and artistic synergism and the magical ways theater makes meaning and metaphor and experiences. He demanded immediacy in his students and his art. Usually, I would leave his office and feel like I'd been in outer space and inner space. Every time I sat with Ron during that year, my world got bigger. I would lob a discovery, hoping to keep up and contribute, and Ron would light up and point to my notebook and tell me, you better write that one down. What you just said, write it down. Ron wanted me to believe that I was my own best teacher. And I'm sure I resisted because, let's face it, I was the one who didn't know shit about shit. But Ron spent that year gently and forcefully introducing me to my future. He prepared me for me. Then and now, I knew that Ron Willis was one of the greatest mentors of my artistic life. There are so many of you here who have your own version of my story. That's why we're all here. Because when we were younger, Ron invited us to stand on his shoulders so we might get a glimpse of that bigger world we were all so hungry to be a part of. Ron made us believe we were worth his time. He made us believe each one of us mattered. Isn't that amazing? One other thing, and this is another part of Ron's legacy, which is that he wrote a beautiful and important book that was many years in the making. A book that synthesized his devising and developing a process for individuals to watch and evaluate and respond to art and artists. The title of Ron's book is Fragile Magic. Fragile Magic. Put those two words together and it makes you a little bit dizzy. Fragile magic. It makes your heart do flip-flops. Fragile magic. It changes the way you think about both words. It creates a feeling, and it describes art and life perfectly. Fragile magic. Ron taught me that art is fragile magic, and so are the people who make art. Today, even as we celebrate Ron's profound impact and legacy, I feel a little more fragile than magic. But early tomorrow morning, I'm going to fly home to Los Angeles and sit down again with the blank page and a deadline. And I'll let myself dream a little bit about my next new play. And when I'm facing that privilege and pressure, I will think about Ron's fragile magic. It's the perfect way to understand process. It's a gift from Ron. And that leads me to the truth about great mentors. They never disappear. They show up to push and challenge and cradle and listen. They can even make us believe that something we say is worth writing down. Mentors don't leave. They live on in all of us, in the work we do, and just as importantly, in the ways we do the work that we do. All of it is fragile magic. Marie, thank you for so generously sharing Ron and his fragile magic with so many of us. And dear Ron, our long conversations and our letters and emails turn out to be never enough. I am grateful for every single syllable. Ron, teacher, mentor, friend, maker of fragile magic. Peace.
Thank you, James, and all the speakers, Jeffrey, Emma, Claire, Lynn, Craig, Michael, Kathy, Jeannie, and James, all have shared with us today wonderful memories about Ron. I think it's almost anticlimactic, but I do want to say a couple of things. Ron and I have been friends for 40 years. I consider that simply a blessing for me. To spend time, so much time with him was to gain insight and perspective. And we laughed. Oh, how we laughed. You know, Ron had that amazing ability of, when there was an argument in the room or between two people, he would kind of insert himself, maybe tell a little joke, use his wit, and suddenly that argument went away. Marie, you were his life partner. How amazing that is. He treasured you. He told me over and over and over again how much he dearly loved you. Speakers today have talked about his intellect, his passion for teaching theater in every form imaginable, and his delightful, witty, almost caustic sense of humor. Ron could be difficult. Oh my God, he could be difficult. I mean, I look at his face, that smile, he's so saint-like. He could be a bastard sometimes. Ron could tell stories. From Mighty Casey Has Struck Out. You haven't heard that in a while, have you? I can still hear it. And The Creation of Sam McGee. Now that poem goes on just a little too long, but I sat through it every time. Ron would entertain us at New Year's Eve parties. Remember those, Marie? Any party, actually, to anyone who would listen. what I wouldn't give to hear them just one more time. And Ron was a master of jokes. Several people have referred to that today. He told them with abandon. Now, as one who is absolutely unable to tell a joke, me, I always get the punchline out of order. And I think that's important for a joke. But you can see how I marveled at his virtuosity and his skill. I'm not sure it's widely known, but I'm going to tell it today. Hope Ron won't mind. Ron always wanted to be, here at the University of Kansas, the University of Kansas court jester. He thought that was what he should be, and he meant it. He was serious about it. He thought that the provost should appoint him. And I know there were times, at least 2 or 3, when he went up on the Hill to have discussions with deans and provosts about that very thing. He would have made a great jester. Can you imagine at the university, you're having trouble in the department, faculty isn't getting along, call up, Ron Willis available? Yes, he is. He'll be right over. Oh my God, he would love that. I remember at the banquet in 1999 when we were roasting him in one of the greatest experiences I've ever seen. Ron came out on a cart. First of all, we're on the stage, right? Everybody's sitting on the stage. The shop door goes up, smoke comes out, and Ron lying on a cart with a straitjacket and a Hannibal Lecter mask. It was called The Silence of the Willis. And for that evening, he could not say a word. I mean, speaker after speaker came up and lambasted him. The dean of the time, Sally Frost Mason. It was marvelous when she got up and she looked at him and he couldn't say a word. And she said, "Ron, I'm happy to tell you I'm your dean and no to everything you ask for." It was wonderful to see. But Ron also, in telling the jokes, being a jester, there was a side of Ron that I think he needed to have an audience. He needed to have people respond to him because he was a great joke teller, a storyteller, and he just needed that audience because that laughter generated from those of us who were the audience for Ron was laughter that will remain with us all our lives. I recall once when Ron and I moved into the front office together as director and artistic director, one of our friends nationally said, "You and Ron Willis in the same office? Who listens?" One quick story, the rubber chicken. I don't know if you've heard this story or not, if it's true, but I got to tell you this story. One day I was sitting in the office, Ron and I were together, and a rubber chicken the rubber chicken's a prop, you've seen in all kinds of plays. And it just appeared on my desk, and Ron walked over to my desk and picked up the rubber chicken and said, "I've been looking for this guy, thanks, I got it." And he walked away. Well, about 3 weeks later, I received a package from an unknown person, and inside that package was the rubber chicken. And for over 10 years, Ron and I sent that rubber chicken back and forth. Through good times, through hard times, you could always count on a rubber chicken appearing. Ron served on many departmental college and university committees over the years and kept them all entertained with his ingratiating sense of humor, his witty repartee, and his sometimes biting humor. No one wanted to get into a matching world and wits with Ron. Ron loved words. Many have talked about that today. He was always using his vocabulary to motivate colleagues, and especially graduate students who were writing theses and dissertations. He had also mastered the limerick. Now, on special occasions, such as birthdays, weddings, retirements, it was a special occasion, Ron wrote you a limerick. And it wasn't complete until you got one. At the roast that I mentioned earlier, several people, Del Unruh and I think Mark Rainey, and there were several that got him back with the limericks. I think that satisfied him more than anything because he loved to see his influence being reflected among his colleagues. The green room was his sanctuary. I think Michael talked about that a little bit, and I just will say that there's no way to explain this phenomenon except that I remember I was down there and Jim Peterson was in an office next to me, and Del Unruh, and maybe even Mark Rainey at one time. And we would be sitting in our collective offices working independently, and all of a sudden Ron would come out of his office and sit down, cross his legs on the couch, and look for any vulnerable student that might be passing by. It was a treat. Then he would share his Jolly Ranchers and his black licorice with any of us that would deign to eat it. We never had a crossword in all those years. Honestly, we never had a crossword. But I do want to mention one thing that finally I had the last word on, and that was Ron was really upset. I mean, genuinely upset with me because I brought 2 teddy bears from home that my daughters had given me. You know, I collected teddy bears over the years, and my wife and my daughters gave me teddy bears. And I brought them in, I sat them on each end of my couch, and Ron came in and closed the door. I thought, uh-oh, something's about to hit the fan. And he said, Jack, get rid of those teddy bears. They're embarrassing us. I never thought of that, but because the students seemed to like them and opened up conversation. But the fact that Ron was concerned about this bothered me. So later, when I discovered that the 15 or so teddy bears that I had, the VIB bears called Very Important Bears or Celebrity Bears, they were bears dressed in costume. You know, there was Scarlett O'Bear and Amelia Earhart and William Shakespeare and on and on and on. Well, I was online one day and I checked, and the company had gone out of business. And I brought William Shakespeare into Ron in his office, and I said, well, Ron, William Shakespeare is now worth $2,500. All the bears had gone up because the company went out of business. That was the silence of the Willis for a short time. Finally, Ron and I have worked together on a play that Henry Haskell wrote called The Sage of Emporia. On and off, we've worked on it for some 30 years. So I feel comfortable in quoting William Allen White when he was talking about his dear friend, Teddy Roosevelt. Ron, you know, will live in our hearts, the stories, the laughter, the challenges. But when William Allen White spoke of Teddy Roosevelt, he said, I have never known another man so vital or another man so dear. Thank you. We have a wonderful reception for you out in the lobby. The design gallery is right around the corner. And please join us, all of you, for that, where you can share stories of your own about Ronald A. Willis. And following the reception, the Eldridge is opening the All-American Room, where those of you that have come a long ways and alums that are back and just friends in general can gather to celebrate, continue the celebration of the life of Ronald A. Willis. Thank you.